All right, everybody. Welcome to today's Midnight training session. Today, we'll be going over Midnight's purchase orders and proofing modules. The purchasing module will help you track any of your POs and requisitions that help you maintain your inventory data. And also, you can control and maintain your vendor records in here, much like the CRM module helps you maintain your customer records. When the PO module is open, by clicking the Purchase module, you'll see that you're brought to a POs and requisitions tab list, and you're also given a vendors tab list. We'll start in the vendors, simply because you can't have purchase orders without them. And in here, you can see a full list of our vendors with the option to add a new vendor by clicking the green button in the upper right corner. If we were to create a new vendor, in this case, we could give our vendor just a basic name. And you don't need to fill out too much information other than the core address info. But the key information here lies in the contact info, as well as the address for making sure that your paperwork will get created and properly associated. So we'll see that I'm creating just a few little general tidbits of info, and then underneath our contacts tab, you can fill out a contact info by placing any of the core information here for the contact itself. In here, this is much like the contact system in the CRM, where any data that you plug in here is available for use as a drop-down for the particular vendor record. This way, when you're on the purchase order, you can actually pick and choose and have the information from their address and email and phone numbers populated onto any of your documentation just by having them selected. Now, the other key area to consider is the frequently purchased items list. From our inventory training session, we did learn that checking the PO item box in any of our inventory makes them available to be selected as a frequently purchased item for any vendor. By making sure you have that box checked, your list here will dynamically update. So that way you can assign specific items to your vendor, give them their own name that matches up with whatever the vendor considers the item to be, and also give it a unit cost at a per piece instance. So that way you'll be able to, when ordering a purchase order, properly have an estimate as far as what your expenses will be for the PO. This can include multiple items. So if you need to keep track of several different items, make sure that you just select all that apply. Otherwise, it will not be available on the PO at all. Now, if we need to adjust any of the information, just like pretty much any other area of our system, we can click the vendor name or the vendor code and update the information accordingly, so that way we get all the details plugged in as we need. And then back under our POs and requisitions list, we can either access a PO that we've already got in the system by utilizing our search filter here to do a search and sort based on what we need. Use an extended search to give ourselves more options to search by. Or we could use our pop-out for the most 10 recently visited items, which adjusts dynamically based on your user profile. In addition, if you have any PO or purchase order user-defined fields created from the admin menu, those instances will be available here as drop-downs. Despite the user-defined field referring to field 1, 2, and 3, These are simply lists populated by up to the 30 available UDFs that you have, and they simply refer to choice 1, choice 2, and choice 3 out of any of the 30 potentials that you've built into your POs. To create a new PO, it's as simple as clicking the New PO button. Under here, any of your POs will be designated as a request. If you don't see the vendor that you'd like to add a purchase order for, in our quick links, you can click Quick Add Vendor. This gives you a pop-up which mimics the screen that you saw a moment ago, where that we can fill in our core vendor information such as base contact, phone number, code, name, address, and the company for properly updating your letterhead information so that way your purchase orders print with your expected logos. Do note that if you do create an item using the quick add, you don't have access to any of the items that you would normally have from the frequently purchased items list, unless you've specifically gone into that purchase order and manually added them back in for that vendor. We'll pick our new vendor that we've just added. In here, now we can see our core information carried through. We can pick the contact, whether it be our default or whether it be one of our other contacts that we've added. And we can watch our contact info update accordingly. Additionally, we have our core project name here, which is much like what you'd expect in your estimates and orders to be treated as the PO name. The invoice number, which is typically a term defined by the company or vendor that you're placing your purchase order through. Internally, this PO number that you have here would be your internal number. This invoice number would be the vendor's PO number. And to go one step further, the PO number that we have listed here is actually your internal PO number and can be adjusted as need be. After updating and clicking Save, you'll see our PO number actually commits to show the new instance. We also have the invoice date and ship date, which are simply information bits to show on the documentation itself, and the close date, which marks your purchase order as closed or completely resolved. If you mark your PO as closed, the way to open it up would be to simply just delete the close date. So now I'll add a couple of items. In here, you can add any of the frequently purchased items to your PO. When you add them in, you can plug in the quantity of whatever it is that you're ordering, plug in any pricing information, or modify whatever preloads based on your selection. You can apply a markup. And at this point, you could simply click Select and Save to commit your item. Alternatively, when you're adding an item to a PO, it doesn't necessarily have to be just a globally applied item. You can associate it with a specific job. By clicking this Select button here, you generate an order pop-out, which allows you to search and filter. So that way any goods that you order can be associated straight into an order. At this point now, my job cost expenses will indicate that I have an $875 expense of paper order for job 1616. To go one last step further, if we'd like to add an item and mark that we've already received it, We can select a material in date to indicate that we have received the goods. And we can fill in the quantity that we've actually received, either the whole amount or increments if we're receiving them in batches. Now you'll see that there is the order number that I've associated with this item. You can associate goods within a PO to multiple different jobs or to versions within jobs. Alternatively, if you were to select your item order up here in the PO's header, this makes it so that all unassociated instances of item data get tied to the job listed in the header. In this case now, I have two items associated with order number 1615 and one with 1616. To remove the association here, you can simply edit the line and hit the red X button to remove the order that you've associated your item to. This saves a step in having to delete and re-add the item entirely. You can also click the details of the item record itself. In here, you can see a full breakout of the info on screen. And if you're using QuickBooks or QuickBooks Online and taking advantage of our purchase order export method, then you can fill out your accounting GLID information for each item, as well as the item code. So that way your export file from Midnight syncs up properly with your QuickBooks or QuickBooks Online data. You can add items on here that are not in the drop-down list. These items don't necessarily commit themselves to your inventory, but they can still be added. Like we see for the other lines, we can simply plug in our data, commit them to a job or not, save the line, and we now have an item that's not registered in our system already under the warehouse module, but still being calculated for our PO order. Now the material in and quantity received columns, these will populate once you receive inventory for those items. And the PO number that's referenced during the inventory receipt process is what generates it. So I'll edit this line and remove the received amounts. I'll save my purchase order. And I'll go into my warehouse module to click Receive Item. In here, I can pick a customer that I'm receiving a PO against. I can also pick the purchase order itself. And you'll see after selecting the item, any inventory that's currently in your database will have a line created which allows you to receive goods for that item. The number 9 envelopes I typed in don't exist in my inventory list yet, so they would not be receivable. Under here, by default, our system assumes that you're receiving one entirely consolidated goods instance of each particular item. You can add separate instances or break them apart if you need to have them go to different locations. Alternatively, for each skid that you have available as being received, you'll have the instance to put away one group of goods per skid. In the case of this 18 by 12 item, I'll adjust it so I'm receiving 2 skids, which have 12,500 per container. And if the number you try to add in here doesn't quite match up to what you're trying to set it with, for instance, by adjusting the skids count as this, your parts per container won't match your packing slip quantity. You'll receive an error preventing you from committing that. So at this point, There's a couple of different things you can do. You can either fill out some more information, such as tying your receipt to an order. You can fill out your bill of lading information and your delivered by info or your comments. You can also click the Assign Put Away button to actually pick and choose where your goods are going. And whatever your warehouse's default receiving location is, will be preloaded here in the Locations dropdown, with the ability to pick and choose based on any active locations in your system. You can, of course, adjust the quantities that are received here, or you can simply commit to whatever you're assuming to have received. And then after putting your goods away, you can open up your skid flag report to print documentation for each item, along with some detailed information on where you already have such amounts of each item at. Or print off a receipt to show that through this PO you've received your inventory. After this process, clicking Save and Close gives you the option to close the purchase order that you've received all of your inventory against. If you have not received the entirety of the inventory counts that you're assuming to receive, you can click No and not close the PO. Alternatively, if you've done it all in this process, you can click Yes, and that does mark the PO as closed and completed. Meaning that if we go back into the purchase order, we'll see that we have a close date of today. And we'll also see that each item has a received material in date of today's date, has today's transaction date, and the full amount of everything that was received, including our 18 by 12 goods, which were split among 2 locations. Last one in here, the billing shipping tab loads by default with information that you have tied to the address for your particular vendor and contact within them. If you were to pick the contact that you'd like to have your goods be considered as shipped to or billed to, you can. Alternatively, the information defaults to whatever you have as the default company address for you and your internal organization. This contact list for internal information, as far as any available employee here, is generated from your admin list under an employee record that has the PO role assigned to their account. And much like it is with our sales reps and CSR instances, under our admin menu's employee record list, you can see that under the roles, if an employee has the PO checkbox checked, that determines that this employee will be available within that particular dropdown. Finally, to indicate that we have officially received the goods that we've assumed to receive, we can take a look in our inventory and actually do a check to see that we have transactions against whatever we've received. In this case, we can see our receipt, the locations that our goods are in, and the transactions to show that we've added them, to give us a complete list of a summed quantity of whatever is on hand, to let us know how much of the goods we have combined with what we already had in the system. We can also confirm this in the reports module by opening up our inventory receipt reports. In our inventory reports, In our inventory reports, we have reports such as daily inventory receipts, which tie themselves to the purchase orders that you would receive an item against. And you can also utilize any of the other inventory count reports to determine where your goods are after you fully receive them. The item receipt history is similar to this process, but this bases itself on the item record itself. It may not necessarily tie itself to an easy to track method. You can always plug in the item ID rather than opening this up from within the item record and see each instance of an item that was received as through a purchase order. Alternatively, from within the PO itself, you have access to all the purchase order reports, such as the standard purchase order, which is what we would consider to be your PO report. The purchase order list report, which shows a list of all POs for any particular vendor within a given time frame. This does its search by the PO's enter date and will show info such as whether or not it's closed, the costs associated with the PO, and just some core information such as what job it's associated with, pulling from the header level. You can also check the PO by vendor, which is essentially the same report, only with the option to identify a group of purchase orders by the vendor rather than searching for the PO or request confirmation type. In the PO by order, which again shows the information that you'd expect to see, just broken out slightly differently to confirm that you've received inventory or any processes and transactions based on that particular vendor and process type. So that completes our purchase order explanation. We'll also take a look today at our proofing system. Under the tools, we have core access to our proofs. And under here, you can utilize this as a list and quick way to view and see any proofs that you've emailed to your customer and their replies back to let you know their concerned statuses or re-uploaded files. When you first click into the proofs module, you've got our core search screen, which includes an extended search to search for closed proofs. Alternatively, you can, like in every other screen, click the recently visited to do a search for your 10 most recently accessed proofs. You can create a new proof through this module by clicking the New Proof Request button, or by clicking under the quick links to add a proof request. Or you can access one that you've already created by just clicking into its instance. You can also add a proof through an order or through an estimate by utilizing under the quick links for that order or estimate the Add Proof Request button. Normally, if you were to add a proof request through the proofing module, you would not have any information default itself. In here, if you do it through the estimate or order, you're given an associated order to tie your proof to, which is version driven. And you also have your customer preloaded. You can pick the contact or contacts and do comma separation to send the proof out to any other instance within the customer record. You can fill in some base comments, and you can also attach a file. This is the proof that your customer would be reviewing. Please do be aware that proofs can be zip files, PDFs, or any image. That's weird. There's also a 20 megabyte file limit. So if you're attempting to send a PSD file, a fairly large TIFF file, or any other type of file that just exceeds 20 megabyte limit, you may receive an issue error that comes up. From that, you can simply try zipping it and sending it again. And once the proof is attempted to be sent, you're given a pop-out that allows you to confirm who you're emailing your proof to, the subject line, and the proof info with the provided URL. You're brought back into the order or the estimate if loaded through an order or estimate. And you can monitor the status of your proof through the proofing module here. Now at this point, I've received an email because I have attached myself as the recipient. So you can see I'm given a website I can click here. In this case, this is what your customer will see. A case where they can approve with comments, or simply reject. Now, if your customer chooses to attach a file back, they can choose a file to upload themselves. Or they can just send it back with nothing. And by them clicking the uploaded file, they can do a download and preview. So that way they can review the file themselves. Once the proof has been approved, they'll click Save and Close. An email will be sent back to the contact that had sent it out. That will list either approval or deny status. And if we recheck our proofs, we can see that our proof was updated with the approved status with an unadjustable history of text that shows whatever the client stated and who sent it and when. Now, when preparing a proof, you can upload multiple files. Oops. Can't do that with an approved proof, though. Let's try this one more time. And if your contact receives the proof from the system that includes multiple files, they can review each one and send back one globally approve or deny instance for confirmation. That's pretty much everything under proofs and our purchase order system. I'll go ahead and close today's session and open everything up for Q&A.